Good afternoon, C3EB Summit attendees. Welcome to another workshop on day 2 of the Culturally Competent Conversations for Equity and Belongingness. And this is a very incredibly powerful presentation because it is beyond timely and beyond overdue that we dig into what our expert speaker in this presentation is going to be talking about. But before I introduce her and give her the stage and let her blow our minds with everything that we can learn about her topic, couple of housekeeping notes as usual. Please join us on Facebook Live or YouTube Live. That's how you can engage with us live and drop your comments, so that if you have any questions as this presentation is happening, Victoria can answer them in this live stream itself. And again, please make sure you subscribe and go to the C3EB Summit Facebook page and let us know how you are liking this content. Let us know how you like this presentation. I know that Victoria would appreciate the feedback, and we at the C3EB Summit would appreciate the feedback so that we can continue to improve our services to you. Finally, this summit and future programming could not be possible without our partners and our sponsors. So a huge thank you to our partners and sponsors: Essential IT, our web team; Defy the Status Quo Marketing; Zanzibar Enterprises, and of course the Nielsen Company. Thank you all so much for walking the walk with me toward this movement for equity, belongingness, and intentional inclusion. That being said, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to all of you on the C3EB Summit platform our next speaker, Victoria R. Clark. And a little bit about Victoria before I give the stage to her. Victoria R. Clark is the managing attorney at Clark Law, PLLC. Victoria is committed to helping those who seek to change their communities and the world. Her clients include entrepreneurs with big ideas, founders of nonprofits with dreams of helping their communities, and artists who inspire us with their talents. She also represents indigent individuals charged with criminal offenses as a member of the Criminal Justice Act panel. She prides herself on being more than an attorney to her clients, realizing that often her clients need more than just information and services rooted in law. They need counsel that takes into consideration the client's personality, goals, financial situation, and strategy. Victoria frequently speaks and presents training and seminars for community organizations and universities, speaking on relevant topics such as the economic empowerment of African Americans, entrepreneurship, and leadership in the community. And today, Victoria is going to be educating us on the truths and misconceptions behind this current movement that is happening called Defunding the Police. So with that, Victoria, welcome.
Thank you very much for that introduction.
Absolutely. And you can take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here talking about an issue that's frequently been brought up this year, which is defunding the police. And for reference, I'm working off of 2 different screens. So if you see my eyes going a different way, my eyes are on my other screen. So in the wonderful introduction, you learned a little bit about me. I come from a background of kind of 2 different areas, which had completely different environments. So I went from North Carolina to DC, kind of very small city to big city. I went from NC State University to Cornell Law School, huge state university to small, more private school. Why am I interested in the defunding the police conversation? Well, because I am a criminal defense attorney. I represent people in court who have been accused of various crimes. And in that work, I have seen firsthand how just the presence of police has affected those people's lives. In my work, I've seen that a lot of people have been arrested merely because of the presence of police, and that no one actually called the police, but because of the way the police act in certain communities, patrolling these communities under the guise of saying they're there for public safety. But really, what that has resulted in is the mass incarceration of Black and brown people that we see today. So, an overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to go over the background. Why are we defunding the police? Who are the police and what do they do? How they're funded and what are their budgets? Some central issues. Would taking money away from police budgets create a better world? And different opinions. Reducing budgets versus abolishing the police. So first, why are we talking about defunding the police? And that's where we go into our first truth versus misconception. The talk about defunding the police is not new. If you're familiar with the Black Panther Party, they frequently talked about reducing or eliminating the police force in favor of something else. We'll tie that in at the end when we talk about whether we want to reduce the police budget or eliminate the police entirely. And so a few months ago, when this defunding the police conversation became popular again on social media and news articles and such, there's a big back and forth about what is defunding the police. Because some people were saying, oh my goodness, you want to just get rid of the entire police force, who's going to keep us safe? And what I saw was a lot of people saying, oh, defunding the police doesn't mean completely eradicating the police force. It means just reducing the budget and putting that money towards something else. And then others said, no, we are absolutely about 100% defunding the police. Those people are the kind of the police abolitionists. And so if you see someone now talking about they're an abolitionist, then that's likely what they're talking about. They're talking about getting rid of police forces as we know them. And so why are we talking about defund the police? In 2020, we're talking about defunding the police because we continue to see police killing with impunity Black and brown people. And nothing seems to be fixing it. Nothing seems to be changing it. We've been seeing it for years, even as far back as, Trayvon Martin, but certainly years before that with Mr. Diallo. And just nothing seems to be changing things. Of course, Trayvon Martin wasn't killed by the police, but that, for me, really sparked my interest in having, in exploring different ways of policing and just how people can kill Black people with impunity in this country. And then again, a few years later with Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And that's when Black Lives Matter and the movement really started to pick up. The conversations, at least from what I saw, really, really started to continue about the police's role in the community. And then just this year, we've seen several individuals, several unarmed individuals killed by the police, and it's been caught on camera. And I mean, a lot of people are just tired of that. It's traumatic to see it. and then it's re-traumatizing to see these conversations play out on social media and in the news, with people saying that these victims of police violence deserved it, or because they were imperfect people, it's okay for them to be killed. And so people were tired of it. In New York City alone, over the past decade or so, they spent $1 billion at least in payouts for police brutality. It hasn't stopped them. It just keeps going. So if the police having to pay out these, and cities having to pay out these large sums of money to victims of police brutality is not stopping them, well, then the conversation is naturally going to, what else can we do? Training isn't working, lawsuits aren't working. Well, we need to defund the police, either get rid of them or significantly reduce their budget, and have, instead of police coming out to, when police are called for certain situations, have counselors or some other type of professionals handle those situations, and have police limited to handling specific things. So a domestic dispute might be handled by counselors in conjunction with the police, whereas a bank robbery might be handled by the police. But there'd be no stop and frisk, there'd be no patrols, any type of thing like that. Traffic stops, if someone runs a red light, for example, do we need an armed police officer to stop them? Well, I'll leave you to think on that. So next, who are the police and what do they do? And it sounds really like a silly question, right? But if you look back in the history of law enforcement in this country, it came from kind of a few different places. So one of those places you should know is during slavery in the South, slave owners employed slave catchers, the slave patrols, to keep slaves in order and to locate them. That profession developed into law enforcement. Second, in the North, police came from two different but similar areas, which is one, protecting business property. Business owners would have forces to protect their property so it wasn't stolen or anything like that. And they would also have patrols to manage labor forces. As you may know, in the early 20th century, there were a lot of just bad labor practices, terrible labor practices that a lot of time resulted in death, or just terrible working conditions for employees. And so they would often engage in strikes, and these forces that businesses use and cities use to manage those also developed into what we know as our police forces today. Which brings us back to, why are we talking about defunding the police? So can something that has its roots in just terrible consequences of capitalism, which is bad labor practices, or white supremacy, slave labor, can that ever develop into something good for the community? Maybe. Is that what we're seeing right now? That's up for you to decide as well. Also, how are police funded and what are their budgets? The policing system and criminal justice system in America is big business. There is a lot of money in policing. You might be familiar with conversations regarding private prisons. So for context, in 2017, state and local governments in America spent $115 billion on police forces. They spent $79 billion on corrections facilities and related services to that. And that's not counting federal contributions to policing and corrections facilities. For example, in DC, where I live, there are almost 30 police forces. That's a lot of money. Imagine what this country could do with $194 billion going towards social services or anything to improve the lives of people in need. That's really what the entire defunding the police conversation is about. There's so much money spent on policing and criminal justice, and it seems to just not be getting us anywhere. So thought is we should redirect that money. Which brings us to the question, the central question, to get us even started in the first place, which is, would putting more money towards social services reduce the need for police or criminal justice reform or the criminal justice system? Meaning, if we could take some of that money and put it towards education or health services, could we eliminate or greatly reduce the things that police are called out for? When I was a criminal defense attorney, daily, right now because of COVID, I'm not in court nearly as much, but there were a lot of individuals who came through the system who had the same or very similar stories. They hadn't gotten their education. They didn't have people really looking out for them at home. They were coming from neighborhoods where there was a lot of violence or other criminal activity. And really just society just wasn't looking out for them. Society didn't care for them. So what if there was someone who was? What if there was someone who said, who was paid to teach kids to read if they weren't getting that knowledge in school? And instead of cutting class because he's not doing well or he can't focus or he's hungry, the money that was otherwise spent on policing would give little Johnny some clothes, clean clothes to wear to school, a full breakfast, lunch, and dinner so he wasn't sitting in the classroom hungry, a tutor so he wouldn't feel bad for not being caught up with the rest of his class, and extracurricular activities so he could explore things that interest him, so he could do what kids in private or private schools or schools in wealthy neighborhoods do, such as take international field trips or participate in competitions, or just, enjoy his childhood without having to worry about going hungry. I think so. I'll be so bold as to say I think so. What if we could give, instead of putting people who are addicted to addictive substances, instead of putting them in jail, we can put them in rehabilitation facilities like the ones that celebrities go to, that have nice, comfortable beds, group therapy, yoga, other exercise facilities, and give them the tools to reintegrate back into society while resisting the temptations of life that might otherwise push them towards those substances. What if we could just give people access to healthcare, better educations, all the things that people desire to have? We could do that with the defunding of the police. And so I want to go into what cities have started to do this, because some places have taken this idea and said, okay, let's give it a try. And so from that, we're going to look and be able to see in the future, how has that turned out and how has that improved people's lives for the better. So hopefully this can become a national event, a national model. So some cities include Austin, Texas, Seattle, New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oakland, DC, Baltimore, Portland, Philadelphia, and even, which came as a surprise to me, Norman, Oklahoma, have all taken parts of their budgets to divert them into social services to see how that would help their communities. Now, it hasn't been without challenges, right? So you might have seen in the news when Seattle, Washington reduced their police budget by only $3.5 million. Their chief of police, a Black woman, resigned. We're likely going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see more protests, more challenges. We've seen one police department say, oh, well, we're just not going to show up when the local library calls for us because we don't feel appreciated. Now, I would say that that's part of the problem, that if you're a government service, you should be protecting and serving everyone. And the fact that the police are not protecting and serving everyone, that instead they are viewing some people as not unworthy of living simply because their skin color makes the police feel threatened, that not everyone is being protected. And that's why we're here. So the last thing I want to talk about is the different opinions regarding defunding the police, which we mentioned a little bit earlier. But if you get to the point where you think the police should be defunded, now you want to consider how much you think the budget should be reduced by. Do you think that there should be no police at all? And if so, what does that look like? If there's a bank robbery, who's going to deal with it? Should it be the role of the private bank itself to protect its establishment? Maybe. There's definitely some pluses and minuses with that. Namely that the banks make a lot of money and they should be able to protect themselves. But we don't want, banks haven't been the most moral establishments. And so we don't want them putting guns in people's hands because we might end up with the same consequences that we have through government-run police forces. Who do we want handling domestic disputes? A reduced police budget might look like a police officer and a social worker coming to handle a domestic dispute, counseling being provided for the household, alternative housing being provided for the people involved so they're not in the same space for a certain amount of time. And certainly, if we see someone who is physically abusing their spouse, what do we want to do with them? Do we want to continuously try to rehabilitate them? Do we think they deserve punishment and should go to prison? I think there's no best answer, but I think the best conclusion would be one where the community has a say in how these situations are handled. The Black Panthers were very big on community policing, but that has its risks as well, right? Because can we trust certain communities to protect a female victim of sexual assault over a prominent male member of the community? We sometimes can barely trust society to protect such victims now. And so when you're leaving communities to make those decisions for themselves, there are risks in the most vulnerable members of our community. So the LGBTQ community, women and male and non-binary sex workers, people addicted to drugs. Those are the people who are in children. All of these people with disabilities, all of these vulnerable people, we want to make sure they're protected in their communities and also sometimes protected from their communities. So I look forward to hearing anyone's opinion or any thoughts on how to reconcile those interests, as well as whether or not you think the police should be defunded, and whether you're a simple reduce the budget advocate or whether you believe in abolishment completely. So with that, I'd like to open the discussion up for questions or comments.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Ruthie.
Thank you so much for that. That was really informative. Actually, all the topics you brought up, I'm like, man, I feel like I really need to go research this some more.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, and I think it was a very good topic for you to tackle just because I feel like when we talk about defunding the police, it's one of those things like when people say Black Lives Matter anymore, it immediately sets some people on edge and they struggle to listen to. So to hear something presented so eloquently and so well informed was fantastic. I think, yeah, I'm gonna have to work on formulating some of my own opinions. I don't know if I'm on the side of complete abolishment, but I do think that some repurposing of that budget would go very far. I'm a veteran, so I know what, our weapons and capabilities and things like that look like. I know what they feel like. And so I'm definitely of the opinion that they don't necessarily belong in our neighborhoods. The same weapons I used, and carried around in Afghanistan don't necessarily belong in the police car that's driving down my street. So I love the idea of social workers having a more serious place, especially considering in a lot of cases, if the police are called to deal with a domestic dispute, and let's say there's children in the home, it's on the police officers in some states that they actually have to report that to Child Protective Services. So there's an extra step. So if police officers get called to a house and they don't feel like they need to report it to Child Protective Services, they could be putting children in danger, and that's not really their job to necessarily evaluate that situation, right?
Right.
So this definitely is something to think about there. For those of us who are having those conversations, I do have one question, because it is so, it's like I said, it sets so many people on edge. I have to ask, what is one, I guess, point that you think we should start trying to make as we're having these conversations? I have family all over the country, so social media is a primary mode of communication, and I like to be able to speak eloquently or at least intelligently on specific matters. So what is at least like one point you think that we can touch on in terms of trying to break through some of the earmuffs that everybody is wearing?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge is just keeping an open mind. I think that especially on the side of some police officers or their relatives or people who are just super advocates of the police, that the defunding the police conversation is saying, or that everyone even participating in the defund the police conversation is saying, we hate every police officer. There's no use for you. You're terrible people. And I think that if they could be a little open-minded and try to see things from another perspective, I think that could at least start the conversation. I think that because the police are in this unique position and held really on a pedestal in society, that they have the power within themselves to make changes. They haven't so far, but I believe it every day is an opportunity to make a change. And so even just being willing to listen and understand, hear the pain and frustration from some people would at least get the conversation started, as well as just realizing your internal biases. So whether someone can say, oh, no, I'm not racist. Well, you might not think you're racist, but you might be engaging in some racially motivated activities that you don't even recognize because where you're from and the way you're raised and who you're around, it just seems like the natural thing to do.
Yeah, for sure. That is totally true. Yeah, Deshawn, you're right. That is certainly a hard one to answer. And open-mindedness, I think, is what's going to get us through this entire situation, especially since my neighborhood does not look like the neighborhoods of Baltimore or Detroit, where the police have a much, more stronger presence. We typically don't have police back here. We have a state trooper who lives on our road. So I see his car, but that's usually it. And that's not the reality for a lot of people in our country. So I think that's something else to keep in mind too. Our neighborhoods are all different.
Yeah, I just want people to think of, if police budgets are like military budgets, they're very liberally funded. And I want people to just think about, what if we funded our schools with the same enthusiasm that we funded our police and our military? Just imagine the changes that we could see in our communities.
Well, it would be options that we could give to those children in those communities, options that help them go beyond the cycles that we see in a lot of minority and majority neighborhoods that are often over-policed and schools are underfunded. So I definitely agree with you there. There's a lot of possibilities. Exactly. So thank you so much for being a part of this and just presenting this, like I said, in such an eloquent fashion. Oh, Deshawn has a question. She said, what would you recommend to get the ball rolling to bridge the gap between citizens and police officers?
That's a challenging one because I think it also depends on where you live. I would say maybe engage a local community organization and and to facilitate a town hall or some type of panel. So I used to be very active in my local Urban League chapter. And so we hosted a town hall with speakers from various areas, but we also had police officers, black police officer. And that just opens the door to discussion when you have a police officer who's willing to be the bridge between the two groups.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess it also would give them an opportunity to kind of get to know some of the people in their communities too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To get to know people in the right way. Because what I see a lot of is with my clients, when a police officer is testifying against them, they'll say, oh, well, I know this person. Well, you know this person because you're patrolling the community. Like you're looking at this person to see what they're doing wrong, but you don't know that person. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't know them outside of that specific framework.
Right. So we want to make sure the police get to know people for who they actually are and not just what crimes they think they might be committing.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. And Deshaun says that was great advice. So
thank you. Question, Deshaun.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being a part of this. AJ, just raves about you and the work that you've done. And this was just very enlightening. So just thank you so much for being here and being a part of the C3EB Summit, first one ever.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you who are watching, we have some additional sessions going on right now. So you can go and continue on with the summit all the way through this evening and, of course, tomorrow. And I want to say thank you right now to all of our sponsors. And if wherever you're watching this, likes and shares, comments are very much appreciated. And we will see you in the subsequent sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.